Hi, thank you for joining us today. I have a very special friend that I've had on my YouTube and podcast last year, and I'm so excited to have her back again. She is an educational advocate and consultant, and she's actually studying to be a paralegal. She's been one of my heroes fighting for the success of her children who have dyslexia, and she has dyslexia herself. But when you meet her, you're going to see she's a rock star. I want to introduce you to my friend, Beckye Barnes. So come on stage here, Becky.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's so good to see you after such a long time.
I know it's been a crazy couple of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've been keeping in touch over the year to find out about you going back to school and what's been happening with your sons, and talking about the science of reading, how important that is versus balanced reading. And to the general public, balanced reading sounds great, right?
It does.
Isn't that
it's
crazy?
It's a debate here in the state of South Carolina. I'm in South Carolina, and 30% of adults are only 30% of adults proficient readers, and over 50% of the adults in the state are functionally illiterate.
Oh,
And it's a big deal. I like to tell people we fight with Alabama and Mississippi for the bottom. So it's a passion of mine. I had no idea. I'm a reader, but I also am nearly 50, and I grew up being taught phonics. So it's a big difference when you're taught phonics and you have a mild dyslexia situation versus when you're not taught phonics and then you have a mild dyslexia situation. What you end up with is a child that is really smart, and he is, and his visual spatial acuity, he could copy things and memorize stuff, but at the end of the day, what was he actually reading? So when we first got him tested, we knew something was off, and I had no idea dyslexia was even on the table. And when she first said he's dyslexic, I was like, that can't be possible. He scores in the 99th percentile in math testing in third grade. How does that happen? And the more I learned, the more I was like floored. I was floored. And the more I realized that I was very lucky to be in a school district when I was that age that specifically taught phonics in elementary school.
amen. Me
and
too.
Sounding out. I mean, that sounds really horrible. People are like, what do you mean? And I decided I wanted to go back to school. So I knew I had ADHD. I mean, anyone who's been around me can tell you I have ADHD. It's pretty bad. I knew it was like significant, but I went back to get neuropsych testing because I'm going to paralegal school and I have some things I want to do. And
congratulations. I'm so happy for you to do that.
Yeah. And it turns up that I've got a specific learning disability in reading, and specifically they found that while my comprehension was really high and that I could fluently read if I knew the words that I didn't know, and my phonemic awareness was impacted. It wasn't like in the 2 percentile, but I also have an IQ that's like in the 95th percentile. So when you've got the ability to decode nonsense words and use those rules and understand multi-syllabic words that you've never heard before, and you can't decode them properly, that becomes a problem. Especially, I'm going to be a paralegal, right? I want to be a paralegal. I want to help children and families with disabilities, and eventually I'd like to go to law school and be an attorney because I have a child that doesn't have dyslexia but has autism. And there are some things that come along with that, even with highly functional people that can go and do work. There's modifications, there's things that we've run into, and I wanted to help people like I was helped. And what I found was there's limits, and I have to say it did make me feel better, that MARYANNE. It made me feel better. It made me feel like, wow, maybe I wasn't such a slacker loser after all in high school, because when you hit a wall, you hit a wall and you start to think it's you. And even though I'm really smart, I could never get above a 3.0 in high school or college. I couldn't maintain the consistency that was needed to be like at the top tier.
Well, a lot of parents need to know they need to advocate for their kids, they need to know their kids can go to college if that's their interest, and that there are accommodations for them to get through college. I think a lot of the parents just steer away from that because we do have technical school and trade school. But, you know, you have really fought the good fight for your kids, and you went to the state, you had civil. I mean, I wrote down that there was state, civil, ethics, and due process, which is actually going to court for your child to get what your son needed for his advocacy, your daughter for her.
Well, it's for, yeah. So I've got two boys. One is 18, one's 17. Yes. So we filed state complaints. We filed federal complaints. We filed ethics complaints. We do have some civil things that are still ongoing because of COVID. And it was all about what is best for my child. And my oldest one is autism spectrum disorder. And because he's a genius, they didn't do anything. And my younger one was in GT, and they're like, well, he's not failing yet. And when I pulled him out, we had DSS was called because we had a doorstep, and we've gone through the gamut. When we pulled him out, we started working with him. This is a child that was supposed to be gifted and talented in 5th grade. It was supposed to be the top tier, but he was doing basic math fluency and writing fluency and reading at like a 1st or 2nd grade level. And when you would give him nonsense words, he would mess them all up. And so it was like, what is going on here? And they were like, oh, it's just his ADHD. If you just treat his ADHD, it would be fine. And what I've since found in my years of advocacy and helping parents and even starting a charter school for children that are dyslexic is and people don't understand the science of reading. They don't understand how it affects you. They don't understand dyslexia. And the assumption is, well, dyslexia just means you can't read the words right. You don't understand what they say. They're mixed up. They're backwards. And it's like this, it's an assumption that, well, if you were just smarter or you were just learn to write the right way, you would be okay. And it's really shocking, the assumptions that are made. And it's even more shocking if you have someone that's really, really smart. The assumption is either you're lazy or you are faking it, that you can't do certain things. And with my child, with me, with other students that are in this twice exceptional, where they are like in the top 10% of IQs, it shows up sometimes not in the reading, but in the writing. Yeah. The writing is the red flag. And I'm sure you see that too, is where they can make it okay with the reading because they are really smart and they can figure out stuff. But the writing, it's like,
well, you know, writing's so important. I just did a YouTube the other day about helping kids start to journal. Let them start writing about what their day was like and being thankful. What were they thankful for? And let it be engaging in that way, but getting them on a track to writing. There's like you had mentioned in one of your YouTubes about learning how to structure sentences and diagramming. And we did all that in elementary school. I loved it. You didn't like it, did you?
I hated diagramming. But here's the thing. My kids were not taught diagramming at all until I homeschooled them. And I'm like, one was an 8th grader, and my oldest one, he's very smart. He can write brilliantly. But my youngest child, he couldn't. And they don't address that. And I will say, before we left, I mean, Tyler got something called a 504 for his ADHD and dyslexia, begrudgingly. But when we pointed out that he was doing writing where there was punctuation, there was grammar mistakes, that there was spelling mistakes, he wrote a haiku where it was 576. We were told that didn't really matter because it's more important to be imaginative. Imagination and creativity is more important. And I was like,
wow.
But how do you, I mean, imagination and creativity is great. But if I have to write an email explaining what I need and document that I'm sick and I've gone to the store and I need you to go let my dog out, how am I going to do that if I don't know grammar, punctuation, and spelling, and how people interpret reading? And if I just do it all phonetically, And I understand there's some great technology, and I use technology, my son uses technology, but at the end of the day, if you don't understand the basics of that, all the technology in the world is not going to help you.
You know, and those are real good examples of just when you want to write something, really, you don't want to be on your computer or on your phone, but directions, you know, if you're a parent, how to take out, you know, how to take care of the food and what the expectations are for the day for the children. And you pointed out on one of your other videos about jobs, you know, people can't apply for jobs if they don't know how to fill out the application. And I even had an adult tell me years ago that he felt like a liar and a cheat having someone else fill out his job application. And then what about if you don't get the job that goes above minimum wage? How can you buy your car? How can you buy the food you want to get, even go out? So we need to read so the kids are graduating from high school, bottom line. And if they want to go to college, we're going to help them get to college. So why do you think it's taking, you know, I know COVID's a big excuse for a lot of stuff, you know, why the teachers aren't teaching, you know, structured literacy, the science of reading, because first of all, they don't know it. Those who do know it, I think, are taking a back seat because of other priorities. But why do you think it's taken us so long, maybe aside from the COVID situation?
Politics. So in the state of South Carolina, reading recovery came about from Australia in the 1980s. And it was out of Australia and New Zealand. It was a new program and they had success. And in South Carolina, reading recovery is in every law. You're going to find reading recovery, Project Read, but reading recovery, because we're the #2 reading recovery center in the nation. We're the second one in the United States with Clemson. Clemson and USC are the big schools. So if you're getting money pumped in to a reading center, then it's a major place where you have to graduate from either USC or Clemson to be a politician. What are you going to get? You're going to have, this is politics. This is politics at play. Plus, that's when the philosophy came about in the 80s, that if we just expose children to good literature, it's like language. We don't have to actually teach them the basics of it, that it'll fall into place and they'll learn. And, you know, I could say this from two perspectives. My older son, someone did work with him. There was an older teacher, her name was Sarah Martin, that was a friend of ours, and she taught in Jersey for 30 years. And she came down and she wrote a phonics book and she worked with him on phonics. But realistically, by 4th grade, by the time he was 4 or 5 years old, he was able to decode on his own. Now, did he have some other issues? Yes. He specifically has a convergence issue. But once the convergence issue was solved, he was reading at an 8th and 9th grade level in 2nd grade. Whereas my younger son, we kept noticing he would only read very simplistic words. And in kindergarten, he was memorizing. He could memorizing, and memorizing's good. But one of the things that we didn't know at the time that we would find out is, like, when we would practice rhymes, nursery rhymes, he couldn't distinguish that. When it was like, what rhymes with tap, he'd go top. It was like tap, top. Yep, T. Okay, what about cat? Car. Why? Well, the both sound at the front. I was like, no, they have to end at the end. So we worked on that. But he also couldn't say crocodile. Crocodile was crocodile. Spaghetti was spaghetti. And it's really cute when they're kids. But what I didn't know until 4th grade, when Dr. Gretchen Hunter, who's the neuropsych that tests him and is amazing at child and family development in Charlotte, is those are all signs of a child that has phonemic awareness issues. And I didn't know until I was like, I'm going to find out how could this kid have dyslexia? Because he was reading, when he does the comprehension tests on MAP, he scores in the 99th percentile. He's not the lowest at fluency. I mean, he wasn't like super high. But when I started piecing apart stuff and I had him start reading stuff to me, it was like, how do you not know the sound? We were doing sounds one day, and I had him tell me what the sound AL, EL, and OL were. And to him, it sounded the same.
Yeah.
Sound the same. Pin and pin, same thing. We would go through and like I's and E's, and I can tell you to this day, and he was pulled out in the fall of 2016, and we were doing stuff because I had to quit my job. The situation with his older brother was severe. He's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from what he endured in the school, the 2 years he was in middle school. And I had to quit my job. I tried to work and it didn't work. I had to quit my job. I had to stay home. I had to homeschool them because we didn't have the funds to send them to private school in this area, because that's going to be 25 to 30,000. Plus, most of the private schools also require a review from the teachers. And when you file 5 state complaints and prove systemic child fine violations, schools don't want to fill out paperwork for you.
I want to stop you right now and let the audience know we're talking as if you understand the terminology of education and advocacy. So if there's any questions you have of anything we're discussing or things that Becky's sharing, like, child find, you need to email me at my website, dyslexia-solutions.com. And I'll explain that, because I've had to explain it to other parents too, as I've advocated as a tutor, because I tutor 3 students right now. So some of the terminology, what is decoding, what is encoding, what is, the rhymes, we're assuming you understand that. So if you don't, you need to email me and I'll explain that further to you.
Yeah, and phonemic awareness is one, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, being able to tear apart the sounds of the words. And I had always had problems. It was a joke, actually, with anyone that had gone to college with me, that I had taken Spanish, because in high school I took Latin. And then when I got to Spanish, I took a Spanish class at the school where I went, and the teacher was a friend of my mother's. And it was a big joke that I couldn't speak Spanish, and then I was required to read 1 Corinthians 13 in Spanish, and I got to the 5th verse, and he said, "That's plenty." And it's a big joke. He must have felt sorry for you and gave you your C, because I couldn't do it. I couldn't hear the sounds. And my mother could speak Spanish. My brother could speak Spanish. They were both, my mom was a Spanish minor. I mean, it wasn't, and the funny part is I've worked in restaurants. To this day, I've worked in restaurants. I can look at Spanish and French, because I had Latin basis, and I can basically understand what's being said. I know when they're talking back and forth. When I was in a restaurant working as a waitress, I could tell you basically what they were talking about, but I cannot say it or read it out loud, because that requires attaching the sounds that make up that language to the symbols that symbolize the letters and the sounds and make up the words. And I cannot do it. And now that I know about it, I'm like, that's a red flag. There's a red flag. That I've phonemic awareness, the ability to tear apart sounds and understand sounds and identify sounds and delete them and manipulate those sounds, and then go, these are the sounds and the symbols that are going to represent those. I didn't understand that until my child had dyslexia. And the way it got found out even is hilarious, because he said to me in 5th grade, and you've got to understand, we're the top school district in the state of South Carolina. He's in 5th grade. He's in the gifted and talented program. And he says, "Mom, which way does the D face?" And I said, "What do you mean, which way the D faces? There's only one way the D faces." He goes, "If I'm trying to write the word dog, does the bubble go right or left?" And I said, "That's not even funny." He goes, "No, which way does it go? I don't remember."
In 5th grade,
and I was like, in 5th grade. And I was like, what? And I went to them and they're like, "Well, he has ADHD. And this, as I'm going through this, my other son's going through this, and we're finding out that the law has been broken on both children, because child fine, if you suspect a disability, you're supposed to tell the school, and they're supposed to, according to federal law, when they take $1 of money, locate, evaluate, and identify." And because my children weren't failing, and my husband and I are both gifted, that's not even a question. We both are in the top 5 percentile. Even with my ADHD, who's off the roof, I scored a 125 on the adult WISC, and I've got like ADHD that I was told is some of the worst they've ever seen. A 125, my husband's is a 130. We're the top, like intelligence wise.
Yeah, so your kids, the
are
two
smart.
Yeah, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Right. So
Yeah.
we've got these smart kids, and the assumption is, well, he's smart, but it's his ADHD. He just doesn't want to do it.
Huh.
Instead of saying, wait a minute, this kid should be doing this. Why isn't he doing it?
Do you have a trick I have a very special trick that finally is working for students. I want to ask you first, do you have a trick to teach the B and the D?
I've got multiple tricks, actually. So there's multiple tricks. I actually, because I've had to do this all my life, and I also didn't realize this is a sign of dyslexia. I cannot tell my right from my left. I literally have to hold them up and go, oh, this faces this way, right? As long as I can remember. It's been like a joke. As long as they can remember, if you tell me right, you don't say this right, or like point, that I'm going to probably go the other way. And for the people that don't know, that actually is a sign of a possible dyslexia and ADHD. And who would have thought that? Because it's not reading, right? But I actually have if you hold it this way and you hold it this way, BED is the way that we had taught my son. And the other one is using baseball, like drawing a baseball. A bat comes before the baseball.
Just they have to memorize that part, that the bat comes before, and then the dog, the head comes before the tail.
Yes.
If they could remember that.
You have to, the same with P and Q and G, like you have to memorize, you have to come up with a way. And my son specifically is really good at remembering pictures. And what's funny is I didn't realize, I will tell you, when we were told that he had dyslexia, I said, how does he have dyslexia? I'm like, she's like explaining, he does this, he does this, he does this. I said, I do that and I don't have dyslexia. And my husband goes, and she looked at me. She said, a lot of people haven't been identified and they find workarounds. I said, what are you saying? And my husband goes, haha, are you saying she has dyslexia? And she just said, I'm saying that there's a lot of people that are smart, they find workarounds. I was like, what in the world? I don't have dyslexia.
The fact that you were taught phonics in elementary school, if everybody was taught it, it would just clear up, because 40% of the 40% dyslexia is genetic, and then there's so much developmental dyslexia. If everybody was taught phonics, you would see those kids who struggled with that. Even my own kids struggled with kinder and first grade. And my daughter did some summer school my daughter went after school a little bit, and my son did summer school, and they weren't even dyslexic. Phonics is tricky, but they had a very good, program was called Spalding, and the school they went to back 20 years ago is still teaching Spalding.
And the other part is I was taught to write cursive, and as much as people think that and I didn't even realize at the time, because they're not really focusing on writing when my kids are coming through. And what I realized is later, after doing the research and going through all these programs and learning about the science of reading, is reading and writing are like this. They're like you really can't separate them. And cursive writing helps us to learn to read and distinguish, like the B and the D, because there's no letter in cursive is alike. And then moving to print, you can distinguish them better because you're used to. And who knew? Why didn't we know that? And when I found the research, and it's out there, and it's been known for 40 or 50 years, that cursive writing and learning to spell teaches you to read and connects to phonemic awareness. I was like shocked. I don't know how else to say it.
One of the Ortongillingham methods that they teach us is also to teach cursive, and what the patterns are. And one of my students, I'm actually helping her with her cursive. And I told her, when she goes to a museum when she's older, and if she ever sees a letter by George Washington or one of our founding fathers, she'll be able to read the letters because they're in cursive. We're cutting them off from that if we're not teaching them cursive.
Right. And the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they're all written in
That's right.
cursive. And what I also found is there are certain schools, classical schools, that use, instead of special ed teachers in some of the private schools, they use NILD therapists, and that's NILD. And they, as a practice, as an educational therapist, believe you should teach cursive to automaticity because of the neurological connections that happen, because handwriting connects parts of the brain that then can be used to build a foundation on to connect the parts of the brain for reading, because it requires different parts of the brain, 4 different parts, right? I didn't know that. But what I knew in the homeschooling community is there was a hyper focus in the homeschooling community on cursive writing and being able to read original documents, if no other reason. And what's interesting is across the board, and there are exceptions, if you do studies on college entrance exams, writing, handwriting, and reading, homeschoolers may not do as well in math, but they are through the roof when it comes to reading and writing, because their parents hyper focus. And a lot of times they're using things like 100 lessons to reading, logic of English, and logic of English is based in the science of reading. It's when you go and look for homeschooling curriculums, or even if you are in a private school, a religious private school, the Catholic schools teach the science of reading. They have all the time. They've never changed that program. A lot of the Christian schools that use Alpha Omega, I believe Sunlight, they have never left phonics. So you've got the public schools who went to balanced literacy because it taught literacy and ideas and literature and a love of literature. Because phonics can be boring. I mean, it's like 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, after a while, you get tired of that. But if you don't understand how it goes, and I will say, when I was growing up, 2 + 2 = 4, and having to know fractions, I was like, I'm never going to use this. As an adult, I'm like, oh, to my kids, I'm like, if you're playing Pokemon, if you're playing like the video games that these kids play, or like some of the games, Prodigy Math, there's different games where they have to do formulas and they have to cast spells, or they have to do this. They're using algebra in real time. We just don't say, you're doing polynomials as you try to go through and figure out if the person in front of you is a good guy or a bad guy, or as you're playing this role-playing game online and trying to decide, where you're going to go next and trade merchants. We don't break it down how it applies to kids.
Becky, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, when your concern is that the kids need to be writing. And I have this wonderful book that I got. It's the ABCs of OG.
Yes.
And it's so amazing because it lists a lot of phrases. And if kids could learn phrases of the sounds, do you agree with that? Learning the phrases? And then,
well, I think it's easier to lose phrases, but I also think that if you just teach the sounds and you don't teach them to connect them to words that they hear all the time, then it doesn't do that. It's multisensory. That's what I would say. And what I would say is, in every case where I've gotten a school to adopt multisensory learning, whether it's OG based, and I like OG, or it's Linda Mead Bell, which Linda Mead Bell is not OG based, but if you look at them, it follows the science of reading. It doesn't have to be from Ortongillingham. And when you say Ortongillingham, Orton was a doctor and Gillingham was a psychologist, and they developed a program based on the research that Orton did. But other people were finding it throughout the world. It's not like, and that's one of the things that I think is really fascinating. When we say the science of reading, we didn't know 100 years ago when Orton and Gillingham put this program together. And even, I believe, Linda Mead Bell came about in the 70s. They didn't know that. But what we know now is science is able to actually put electrodes on your brains or put you in like an MRI, and they're actually able to see in real time how like the connections in your brain works as an illiterate person is reading.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if you're learning to speak Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, French, Latin, English, in order to read, specific things have to be happening in your brain or it's not reading. Every time there is something that lights up, the way the brain works over hundreds of studies, there's nothing that is a new pathway. Every time it has to connect the sounds or the words to a symbol and be understood, or it's not reading. And when I read that, I was like, that's fascinating. And then I started doing other things. And what you find is Ortongillingham is the gold standard, but you have all these other people that didn't know about Ortongillingham in other countries, and they're teachers and they're looking to see what happens and works. And
I know
what
people
didn't.
who have created the same stuff that other organizations have created. They didn't know it was Ortongillingham. It's just, to them, it makes sense. This is how you're going to teach.
Right.
Let me ask you, we need to wrap it up. Can I ask you what would be your final your words to the audience as we wrap this up?
Invest in the science of reading, learn about the science of reading, attend your seminars, read Overcoming Dyslexia. Louisa Moats is got great literature out there. And I would say push for the science of reading in every classroom in every school.
Okay. And that's a very good segue for me to share that February 26th, the International Dyslexia Association in California, it's called the Tri-County branch, they're having their spring conference from 12 o'clock to 4:30. And I've been asked to teach on the science of reading. So I'm going to be doing a 15 to 20 minute presentation. And what that is going to encompass is how we have to teach, structured, systematically, and sequentially, build comprehension and cumulatively. So let's learn what all that is about. And Becky, thank you for being with us today. You've shared a lot of knowledge, and I hope parents had their little notepads out and are re-listen to this episode, right? And share with others. Because
and I thank you for doing that. And I appreciate your doing this and giving people an opportunity to help their kids and teaching about this. It needs to be done. And
how can they reach you? Go ahead.
So if you want to reach me, I'm going to give you my school, because I am on a school board for a public dyslexia charter school. And I know you know that. It's called, for short, it's called PACE Academy, Palmetto Achievement Center for Excellence in Columbia. And it's going to be Beckye, Beckye .Barnes, BARNES at choosepace.com. choosepace.org, not choosepace.com,
okay.
choosepace.org. And you can reach me through there. And it's the school that me and 9 other people started to show South Carolina that if you have the science of reading in place and you have explicit, sequential, structured literacy, that you can make a difference, and that you don't have to pull kids out, and that kids can graduate on grade level by 8th grade reading, even with dyslexia.
Well, I feel like I'm going to have you back and share some more information, even to talk about graduation. That's really important. Well, thank you for joining us. So I just want to let you guys know that if what we have shared has inspired you, we are a nonprofit organization. So if you go to my website, dyslexia-solutions.com, and you'd like to make a donation, it would help these YouTubes continue to go forward. And we have a lot of information there. Also, go into the website for the International Dyslexia Association. It's called the Tri-County branch for the events. And you can sign up for this conference on the 26th, and you can learn very easily about structured reading. So thank you again, and I wish you all a very blessed week. Bye-bye.